My daughter stole every cent from our accounts and ran away with a criminal, leaving me empty-handed after 42 long years of work. The betrayal burned deeper than any wound. Rage boiled in my chest, and yet when I looked at my 15-year-old grandson Micah, he only gave me a calm, almost knowing smile. "Grandpa, don't worry," he said softly. "I've taken care of everything." I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but a few days later the phone rang. On the other end was my daughter, her voice shrill and furious, screaming at me as though I were the one who had wronged her. My heart broke all over again, but before I tell you what my clever grandson did, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what time it is where you are right now. It had all started so ordinarily. I inserted my card into the ATM slot just as I had done thousands of times before. The screen glowed to life, asking for my PIN. 4 digits numbers that had lived in my muscle memory for over 20 years rolled effortlessly from my fingertips. Then in bold, merciless letters, insufficient funds. My hand froze on the keypad. The words stared back at me, unreal, impossible. I pulled the card out, turning it over, checking the magnetic strip for scratches. Maybe the machine was faulty. It had to be. I slid it back in, entered the PIN, again requested a withdrawal. Same response. Insufficient funds. "This can't be right," I whispered, my voice cracking. Behind me, an elderly woman shifted impatiently, her keys jingling in her purse. My palms grew clammy. I fumbled for my other card, the one tied to my savings account. That account was untouchable. I checked it only last week. $12.847. My nest egg. My entire life's work tucked away after 42 years at the Ford plant. Every overtime shift, every holiday missed, every dollar carefully set aside for retirement and for Micah's future. But when I punched in the numbers, my fingers trembling, the machine delivered the same crushing verdict. Insufficient funds. I felt sweat beat on my forehead, despite the cool April breeze brushing my neck. The woman behind me cleared her throat sharply. "Sorry," I muttered, snatching my cards as the machine spat out a receipt. I glanced down. Balance 0. Last transaction, 9:23 a.m. today. The world tilted beneath me. My knees nearly buckled. I stumbled into the bank through the glass doors that reflected an old man I barely recognized, faded jeans, worn flannel eyes clouded with confusion and dread. Inside, the familiar scent of carpet cleaner and burnt coffee filled my nose. Comforting once, now suffocating. "Afternoon, Mr. Williamson." Janet Morrison greeted me with a smile from behind the teller window. She had handled my deposits for 15 years, always cheerful, always kind. "Janet," my voice cracked. "There's something wrong with my account." I slid both cards across the counter with shaking hands. "The ATM says I have no money, but that's impossible." Her practiced fingers flew over the keyboard. At first she wore her usual smile, but then it faded. "Let me check your history," she murmured, her brow furrowed. Then she looked up, voice soft, careful. "Mr. Williamson, I see a withdrawal this morning at 9:23 a.m. for the full balance of $12.847. "That's not possible," I stammered. "I was at home. I was asleep at 9:30. Her eyes shifted, pitying. "The transaction shows it was made by Vera Hayes. She's listed as a joint account holder." The name hit me like a hammer to the chest. Vera, my daughter. "No," I muttered. That can't be right. There must be a mistake." But Janet only turned her monitor toward me, and there it was in black and white. Withdrawal Vera Hayes. Full balance. Every penny gone. My life's work erased with a single transaction. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Williamson," Janet said gently. "The transaction appears legitimate." She had proper authorization. The numbers on the screen blurred as my vision swam. I had added her to the account 3 years ago when she was drowning in debt from her divorce. I'd wanted to help to make sure she and little Micah would be safe if anything ever happened to me. I never imagined she would take everything and vanish. I staggered back from the counter, the weight of betrayal crushing me. My own daughter, flesh of my flesh, 42 years of sweat and sacrifice gone. But that wasn't the end of the story, not even close, because my clever grandson already had a plan. My hands shook as I gathered the cards from the counter, trying to steady my breath. "Thank you, Janet," I murmured. though the words barely scraped out of my dry throat. Her worried eyes searched my face. "Mr. Williamson, are you sure you're all right? Do you want me to call someone?" I shook my head quickly, forcing a weak smile that fooled no one. "No, no, I'll be fine." But I wasn't. My legs carried me toward the exit, stiff and unsteady, as though they no longer remembered how to support me. The glass doors opened and the late afternoon sunlight poured over me, too bright, too sharp, stabbing at my eyes like needles. I stood there blinking, the warm rays falling on shoulders that suddenly felt impossibly heavy. My old Ford pickup was still parked where I had left it, a stubborn relic of my working years. But somehow in the span of a single moment inside that bank, the world had shifted. It wasn't the same truck, the same parking lot, the same town I had known for decades. Everything familiar felt hollow now, like the skin of a life that had been gutted from the inside. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. My cell phone trembled in my hand as I scrolled to Vera's number. My daughter, my only child, the girl I had once carried on my shoulders at county fairs, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose tears I'd wiped away after her first heartbreak. Surely there had to be an explanation. Some mix-up, some emergency with Micah. She couldn't do this to me. My thumb hovered over the call button, heart hammering against my ribs. Finally, I pressed it. 1 ring, 2, 3, 4, 5, straight to voicemail. Her recorded voice flowed through the speaker, cheerful and detached like a stranger. "Hi, you've reached Vera. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." I hung up my chest tight and immediately tried again. Ring after ring, voicemail. I gripped the wheel tighter, the leather slick beneath my sweating palms. Outside, the windshield cars passed along Main Street, ordinary people living ordinary lives, their worlds intact, while mine disintegrated in silence. I tried a third time. My voice cracked as I whispered to the phone, "Pick up, Vera. Please, just pick up." Fourth attempt. Fifth. On the sixth call, the line clicked. Her voice came low and controlled. "Dad, I know why you're calling." The tone cut through me. Not surprised, not remorseful, just cold, prepared. "Vera, honey," I started carefully, desperate to keep my voice calm. "What happened with the money? Janet at the bank said you withdrew everything this morning, but that can't be right." Silence stretched across the line. I could hear the faint rush of highway noise in the background, the hum of tires on asphalt. Then her voice again, each word sharp as glass. "It's exactly right. I took it all. Titus and I are starting fresh somewhere new." The phone nearly slipped from my grasp. "But sweetheart, that's everything I have. My whole retirement. 42 years. How am I supposed to live?" "You'll figure it out. You always do." My throat tightened. "Vera, please. If you're in some kind of trouble, we can talk about this. Just come home. Bring Micah. We'll work it out together." A harsh laugh rattled through the speaker, bitter and cutting. "There's nothing to work out, Dad. I deserve this money more than you. I've spent my whole life taking care of everyone else. Now it's my turn." I pressed my free hand against my temple, my mind spinning. Her words felt twisted, unrecognizable. "What about Micah?" I pleaded. "What about his school, his friends? He can't just disappear like this. He's a child, he needs stability. Micah's with me. He'll adjust. Kids are resilient." I closed my eyes, my chest aching. My grandson, sweet, brilliant Micah. The boy who built science fair projects late into the night, who played chess like a prodigy, who laughed with me on the porch as we drank root beer floats. Torn away from everything he knew. "Vera, you can't do this," I whispered. "That boy needs more than a happy mother chasing dreams. He needs a home." Her voice sharpened, anger rising. "What he needs is a mother who isn't stuck in some dead-end town, working dead-end jobs, watching life pass by. I want more. I deserve more." I swallowed hard, my voice trembling. "I gave you everything I could. When you divorced Jimmy, who paid for your lawyer? When you couldn't make rent, who covered it? When Micah needed clothes, supplies, birthday presents, who made sure he had what he needed?" I know, she snapped. "And this is me paying you back by taking what I need to finally live a better life." The logic was madness. My pulse pounded in my ears, each beat heavier than the last. "Sweetheart, please. Come home. If you need money for something, we can arrange something. We'll figure it out together. Her response was final. There's nothing to arrange. Titus and I are already 3 states away. Don't try to find us. And then click. The line went dead. I called back instantly, straight to voicemail, again and again. The third time a cold automated message replaced her voice. The number you have dialed is not in service. She had blocked me. I sat frozen in the driver's seat staring at the phone in my hand. My daughter, my only daughter, had stolen my life savings and vanished into the wind. And worse, she had taken my grandson with her. The weight of it crushed down on me, heavier than steel. 42 years of sacrifice erased in a heartbeat. But the money wasn't what mattered most. What mattered most was Micah. No warning, no discussion. No chance to say goodbye to the boy I had helped raise for 15 precious years. One moment he was mine to hug, to guide, to protect, and the next gone stolen away by the very daughter I thought I knew. The parking lot seemed to spin, the pavement shimmering under the relentless sun. I gripped the door handle just to keep my balance, fighting a rising wave of nausea. 42 years of sweat and careful saving, 42 years of overtime shifts, calloused hands, missed holidays, all erased in a single morning transaction. And by whom? Not a stranger, not a thief in the night, but the woman I had once held swaddled in a pink hospital blanket, the little girl whose tiny fingers had clutched mine as she took her first steps. The daughter I'd taught to ride a bicycle, the one I'd walked proudly down the aisle on her wedding day. She had destroyed me without hesitation, as if those decades meant nothing. With trembling fingers, I turned the key in the ignition. The old Ford coughed, sputtered, then roared to life, steady and dependable. The sound felt like an anchor. At least something in my life still worked the way it should. I pulled onto Main Street, driving slowly past the landmarks of my entire existence. The hardware store where I'd bought every tool for every home project. The diner where I'd shared countless cups of coffee with coworkers after long shifts. The barber shop, the pharmacy, the row of small shops that had anchored this little town for generations. To anyone else, it was just another ordinary day. To me, everything looked the same, yet nothing was familiar. The man who had parked outside the bank an hour ago no longer existed. That man still believed his life was steady, his savings safe, his family trustworthy. That man had hope. The man driving through town now was hollowed out, stripped bare, unsure of how to survive with nothing but 40 crumpled dollars in his wallet. I didn't want to go home, not yet. I needed time to think, time to breathe, time to process how my own daughter could shatter me so completely. So I drove without purpose, letting old habits guide me through streets I knew by heart. Past the elementary school where Vera's laughter used to echo across the playground. For 6 years, I had picked her up from Mrs. Patterson's classroom door, her small hand waving wildly as she ran to me, pigtails bouncing, backpack swinging. I could still see her in 3rd grade, standing proudly with her ribbon after winning the spelling bee. I'd been the father in the tiny plastic chair, clapping so hard my hands ached, my chest swelling with pride. A few blocks later, I passed the ice cream shop on Elm Street. I couldn't help but remember her 10th birthday, just the two of us, because her mother had already started drifting away by then. Vera had ordered a banana split bigger than her head, her smile stretching ear to ear. "This is the best birthday ever, Daddy," she'd said between sticky spoonfuls. I had believed her. My throat tightened as I turned down the road toward Riverside Park. My truck rolled to a stop beside the pond, and I walked slowly to our old bench, the one facing the water where ducks always gathered in the spring. I sank down onto the worn wood, my bones heavy, my heart heavier. Vera had once stood right here at the fence, maybe 3 or 4 years old, clutching a paper bag of stale bread. She had torn each piece carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Not too big, Daddy. The little ducks can't eat big chunks." She'd stood on her tiptoes to toss them into the pond, her small hand slipping into mine with absolute trust. "I love you best of anyone, Daddy." Those words echoed across 28 years, rattling inside the hollow space she had left in me. Now the ducks still paddled near the shore, but there was no little girl tugging at my sleeve, no voice asking questions about which ducks were boys and which were girls. Just me, alone. I remembered another day in this park. Vera was 7, learning to ride her bike without training wheels. She had been terrified but determined. Over and over she said, "Don't let go, Daddy. Promise you won't let go." But I had let go because I had to, and I had watched as she wobbled, fought for balance, and then miraculously rode away on her own. The look on her face, pure joy, pure freedom. She'd circled back, cheeks flushed, hair flying, shouting, "Did you see me, Daddy? Did you see me ride all by myself?" When had that fearless, joyful little girl become the cold, hard voice on the phone? When had "I love you, best of anyone" Daddy twisted into? I took it all. Memories blurred together. High school graduation. Vera in her blue cap and gown standing tall behind a podium, giving the valedictorian speech to a gymnasium filled with parents and teachers. I had sat in the front row beaming, fighting back tears as she spoke about dreams and possibilities, about the future stretching bright and wide before her. My father taught me that hard work and dedication can overcome any obstacle, she had said that night, and I had believed her. The entire audience had turned that night to smile at me, the proud single father who had raised such an accomplished daughter. I remember the warmth in their eyes, the respect in their nods, the whispered words of admiration as Vera stood on stage in her cap and gown. That man did it alone. I had believed in that moment that all the nights of exhaustion, all the years of sacrifice had finally bloomed into something extraordinary. But now, sitting here decades later, I couldn't help but ask myself, what obstacles was she overcoming now? What lesson was she proving by emptying my accounts, by stealing the only safety I had for the years that remained of my life? Her wedding day surfaced in my mind, sharp and unwelcome, like an old wound reopening. I could see it so clearly, the VFW hall decorated with strings of white lights, the air thick with the smell of cake and beer laughter rising above clinking glasses. Then the music had started, and it was time for the father-daughter dance. She had been radiant in her white dress, lace spilling around her as I guided her carefully across the small wooden floor. I remember the feel of her hand in mine, the weight of her head as she leaned closer, the whisper in my ear that nearly broke me. "Thanks for always being there, Dad. I don't know what I would have done without you." I had held her close, promising silently and aloud that I always would be there, through Paul's rough edges that would later turn into hard fists of anger, through the drinking that shattered their marriage, through the nights when Micah's little ears caught every argument that spilled through thin apartment walls. I had been there, through marriage troubles and money problems, through the exhaustion of raising a grandson who deserves stability more than anything. I had been there every step of the way, until this morning, until always being there meant being rewarded with the cruelest betrayal, financial ruin, at the hands of the very person I had sacrificed for. The spring breeze drifted through the park, carrying the scent of new grass, the promise of renewal, of possibility. Yet for me, all it carried was the crushing weight of memory colliding with present reality. Every sacrifice, every shift I'd worked when my body begged for rest, every meal skipped to add another dollar to savings, every careful choice justified by love. And now, in the coldest truth imaginable, love had been revealed as meaningless to her. Where did that little girl go, the one who had clutched my hand and declared me the best daddy in the world? When did her laughter twist into lies? When did her trust sour into betrayal? When did she learn to smile into my eyes while quietly planning to strip me bare? My vision blurred. I wiped my eyes with the back of my rough hand and forced myself up from the bench. The ducks glided along the water, bobbing and diving, as if no human sorrow could touch their world. Their constancy was almost cruel, a reminder that life moves on, indifferent to heartbreak. Some things remained steady at least. Something still made sense even if I didn't. Walking back to the truck, I caught my reflection in the side mirror. The same flannel shirt, the same lined, weathered face. But something deep inside had shifted, broken, in a way that could never be undone. The man looking back at me was no longer simply a father or a grandfather. He was someone learning a brutal truth, that love could be turned into a weapon, sharpened by the very people you love most. I drove slowly toward home, dread gnawing at my stomach. I could picture Micah's backpack hanging by the front door where he had left it yesterday. I could see his chess set still spread across the kitchen table, pieces locked in a difficult endgame we had been solving together. Every corner of that house was full of evidence of a life I thought was steady, meaningful, safe. How could I walk back into that house now? How could I step into the same rooms knowing that everything I believed about my family had been shattered in a single day? How could I look into Micah's bright, trusting eyes and tell him that his mother, the woman who had carried him, who should have loved him most, had abandoned him and taken everything with her. My key hovered at the lock, trembling as if the door itself had become a threshold between two worlds. Behind it, the illusion of a family still existed. But once I stepped inside, I would have to face the ruins of truth. The key turned with a familiar click, and I stepped into what remained of my normal life. Inside, everything was unchanged, and yet nothing felt the same. The house smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner, the same as every morning, but the air felt heavy, unwelcoming. I hung my jacket on the wooden peg by the door, the same peg I'd used for 23 years. My living room stretched before me, lined with furniture that had witnessed birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and quiet evenings of homework and television. Now it all stood hollow like a stage set after the actors have gone. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece in their neat row, no longer just memories but evidence exhibits in a trial I hadn't known I was standing in. Faces smiled back at me from a time when promises hadn't been broken. I walked slowly, almost reverently, until I reached the largest frame. Vera's wedding day, 13 years ago. She was radiant in her lace gown, me stiff in my only good suit. We were smiling, both of us, believing in futures that would never come to pass. I lifted the frame with trembling hands, studying the man who had thought he was giving his daughter to someone who would cherish her. Paul Hayes. He had seemed like such a good man back then. College-educated, steady job at the insurance company, polite and respectful at our first meeting. I had believed I was handing my daughter to safety, to stability, to love. 3 years. That was all it took for everything to unravel. That's how long their marriage lasted, 3 fragile years before the cracks began to spread like hairline fractures in glass. I sank into my old leather armchair, the one molded to my frame from decades of use, positioned perfectly so I could see both the television and the front door, as if always keeping watch. The wedding photo still weighed heavily in my hands, not just a frame of smiling faces, but a relic of promises that had long since turned to dust. The memories came uninvited, flooding with merciless clarity. At first, the signs had seemed harmless, almost disguised as humor. Paul would make small comments at Sunday dinners. "Honey, the chicken's a little dry. Maybe next time." Always delivered with that polite smile, always softened by laughter, as though they were jokes. But I saw what others missed: the fleeting stiffness in Vera's jaw, the way her eyes dimmed just a fraction each time. My bright, confident girl, the valedictorian who once debated teachers and lit up classrooms, was beginning to fold in on herself. Then came the financial control, insidious and suffocating. She had to explain every grocery receipt, justify every purchase, as if she were a child instead of a grown woman. My daughter, the girl who once dreamed of running her own company, was suddenly apologizing for buying Micah a new pair of shoes when the soles of his old ones split open. Each apology was a small piece of her spirit breaking. And then came the morning that marked the end of pretending. October 15th, 2022, a Tuesday. I remember because I had been sitting at the kitchen table, coffee, steaming the newspaper spread before me, in that quiet hour before the day began. The doorbell rang at 7:30 a.m., shattering that calm. Vera stood there in yesterday's clothes, her left eye swollen shut, the bruise already turning an angry purple. And clinging to her leg, 3-year-old Micah, silent, terrified, carrying the kind of fear no child should ever know. His tiny hands gripped her with the desperation of someone who understood, even without words, that his world was no longer safe. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracked and broken. "Paul hit me again. Please, can Micah and I stay here again?" That word again cut through me like a blade. How many times had there been an again I hadn't known about? How many nights had she covered bruises with makeup, hiding her shame, too afraid or too proud to come to me? "Of course, sweetheart. You're always welcome home." I said it instantly, without hesitation, without a single question. No conditions, no judgment, just open arms and an open door. That was my role, wasn't it? To protect, to rescue, to absorb the damage so she could breathe again. And I did, every time. When she needed money, I gave it. When she stumbled, I caught her. When Paul drained their joint account and vanished before the divorce papers could be filed, I hired the lawyer myself. When she couldn't make rent, I signed the check. When Micah needed clothes, school trips, sports gear, birthday presents, I provided it all gladly without a second thought. And truth be told, I loved it. I loved being needed. being the rock, the safe harbor, the father who could fix any crisis. In those moments, I felt indispensable, vital. My sacrifices gave shape to my life, gave purpose to my retirement. But somewhere along the way, love twisted into something else. My unconditional giving became permission. Every rescue taught her that she could take without consequence, that my support was not a gift, but a right. Every yes eroded accountability. I didn't realize I was teaching her that love could be exploited, that my devotion could be turned into currency. I stared harder at Paul's grin in the wedding photo. He'd been a taker too. His method was fists and fear, while mine was kindness and safety. Different tools, same result. Both of us had stripped Vera of responsibility, though, in opposite ways. And now the bill had come due. From upstairs, faint video game music floated down, cheerful and oblivious. Micah. My grandson playing in his room, utterly unaware that his world had just collapsed. He didn't know his mother had emptied my life savings and vanished. He didn't know that everything I'd built for his future had been stolen in a single act of betrayal. I returned the wedding photo to the mantel, hands trembling, and picked up the next frame. Christmas morning 2023. Vera in her pajamas, Micah ripping open wrapping paper, me behind them with a smile as wide as the tree itself. A perfect tableau of happiness. Every present under that tree had been bought with my money, my effort, my sacrifice. Back then, I believed it was worth it. Back then, I believed love was enough. Now I wondered, when had I love you, Dad become, I deserve this money more than you do? When had affection turned into entitlement? The truth pressed down on me like a stone in my chest. The answer was bitter, I had taught her. Every bailout, every rescue, every time I shielded her from the consequences of her choices, I had carved this path. I hadn't just allowed it, I had created it. Upstairs, I heard footsteps, Micah moving across the floor. Soon he would come down, expecting dinner, homework, a game of chess, maybe a little TV before bed. Our routine steady and comforting, the world he thought was unshakable. But tonight I would have to tell him. Tell him that his mother had abandoned him. Tell him that the woman who should have been his protector had chosen herself instead. Tell him that the secure life I'd built for him was gone. The house felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in. Every piece of furniture mocked me with memories of the life I thought we had, the life where being a good father meant everything would turn out fine. But tonight I knew better. I walked toward the kitchen, my steps slow and heavy, as if each movement might somehow shake loose the crushing weight pressing down on my shoulders. I needed to move. I needed action, however small, to fight against the helplessness clawing at my chest. The silence of realization had become unbearable in the kitchen. My kitchen was the only place that promised familiarity when the rest of my world had collapsed. The moment I stepped inside, the warmth greeted me. Not the heat of the stove, but the quiet embrace of routine and history. The wooden counters, scarred and worn, still bore the marks of decades of family meals, nicks from hurried knife work, faint stains from spilled coffee or gravy. The old gas stove stood like an old soldier, loyal yet demanding, still needing a match to spark its flame. The coffee maker, faithful as sunrise, sat waiting, ready to gurgle to life at precisely 6 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 20 years. I clung to these details like lifelines. I needed their constancy. The world might be falling apart, but beans still had to be measured, filters still had to be placed, and water still had to be poured. These small rituals offered sense when nothing else did. I reached into the freezer, pulled out the familiar bag of beans, and poured them into the grinder. The sharp crack of them breaking apart filled the silence, a jagged relief drowning out for just half a blessed minute the muffled sound of video games drifting down from upstairs. 30 seconds of peace, 30 seconds where the world could shrink down to the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of grinding. I moved automatically, water from the tap filter into place, grounds, measured with the precision of habit, poured in with the muscle memory of 20 years. The smell began to rise, warm, rich, grounding. My gaze drifted across the kitchen until it landed on the oak table, the one that had anchored this room for so long. 4 chairs surrounded it, each carved with invisible stories. Micah's seat by the window, the one he'd claimed as his own, where sunlight fell on his notebooks as he did his homework. My chair at the head facing the stove, where I kept a father's watchful eye over meals and conversations. And then across from me, Vera's seat. I could almost see her sitting there again, January 15th, just 4 months ago, her smile bright, her eyes dancing with hope, as she introduced me to the man who would destroy everything. Dad, I want you to meet Titus. He's really special to me. That night is etched into my memory like a scar. A cold Sunday evening, the house filled with the smell of pot roast and roasted vegetables, comfort food I'd cooked 100 times before. Vera had brought him in from the cold, her arm linked tightly with his, her whole body radiating excitement. Titus had stepped into my kitchen like he owned it. Black leather jacket despite the bitter chill outside. Heavy motorcycle boots that scuffed my clean floor. Tattoos creeping up his neck, dark jagged lines, spelling out stories of prison cells and mistakes carved into skin. And that smile, smooth practice, but never quite reaching his eyes. Nice place you've got here, Mr. Williamson. His voice was slick, too polished, the kind of smoothness that didn't belong to honesty, but to manipulation. Great security system, quiet neighborhood, real comfortable setup you three have going here. He'd shaken my hand, his grip strong, calloused. The kind of calluses that come from hard labor or from fighting. His eyes, though, weren't on me. They scanned the room, cataloging. The flat-screen television in the living room. The family photographs proudly displayed on the wall. The signs of stability and financial comfort I had never thought to hide. Vera had been radiant, clinging to his arm like a teenager in love. Titus has had some rough breaks, Dad, she'd said with that wide, desperate smile. But he's really turned his life around, haven't you, honey? Absolutely beautiful, he'd replied smoothly, his hand resting a little too tightly on her shoulder. Past is past. I'm all about the future now. But dinner that night had been anything but ordinary. His questions came wrapped in small talk but landed with weight. How long had I worked at Ford? What kind of pension did auto workers get? Did I own this house outright? Was Vera listed on any of my accounts? I answered with politeness. But inside me, alarm screamed. Something about him was wrong. The way his hand gripped my daughter's arm like ownership. The way he smiled when money was mentioned. The way he seemed less interested in Vera's laughter than in the financial fortress he saw in the walls around him. And yet Vera had been happy, happier than I'd seen her in years, maybe since before Paul's cruelty had hollowed her out. She laughed too easily at his jokes, brushed off his crude remarks as just being real, and defended his rough edges with a blind devotion that frightened me. When they finally left that night, I stood in this very spot by the coffee maker, hands deep in soap and water as I scrubbed the dishes. My reflection in the kitchen window looked older, wearier. I remember telling myself I was being too protective, that maybe I was wrong. Maybe people really could change. Maybe Titus deserved the benefit of the doubt. But even then, deep in my bones, I knew the truth. His past wasn't behind him. It was sitting at my kitchen table, smiling at my daughter and planting roots in the foundation of my family. The next morning, just as the sun lifted over the rooftops and the neighborhood began its slow stir into life, my neighbor Tom Rodriguez knocked on the back door with his familiar Tuesday ritual, a steaming thermos in hand, and that steady, unhurried presence of a man who had seen too much but still carried on. Interesting company you had last night, Tom remarked, as he settled heavily into the very chair where Titus had lounged just hours before, his casual tone laced with something sharper. He leaned back, arms crossed, his eyes scanning my kitchen like they always did, missing nothing. Recognize that motorcycle from the department database, he added, voice dropping lower. My heart stumbled in my chest. Tom wasn't just any neighbor. He had worn the badge for 15 years, long enough to know every petty thief, every drunk who couldn't stay out of trouble, every face in the revolving door of crime across 3 counties. His weathered face carried the weight of too many domestic calls, too many mothers crying on porches, too many robbery reports filed in the middle of the night. He looked me square in the eye, ran his plates after he left. Guy's name is Titus Morrison, record longer than my arm, robbery, fraud, assault charges, real piece of work. The coffee cup froze halfway to my lips, the steam fogging my glasses as if to blur the reality I didn't want to see. How bad, I managed my voice barely above a whisper. Tom didn't soften the blow. Bad enough. 3 convenience store robberies in Michigan. A credit card scam that wiped out the savings of a half-dozen elderly couples. Beat a man into unconsciousness in a bar fight 2 years ago. This guy's a predator. He goes after women who are vulnerable, especially women with families, women with resources. I set the cup down with trembling hands. The ceramic rattled against the table, betraying the quake inside me. What should I do? Tom leaned forward, his voice roughened by urgency. Keep him away from your family. Change any passwords he might have seen. Move your money if you can, someplace Vera can't touch. This isn't the kind of man who changes no matter what he's telling your daughter. His words should have ignited action, should have sent me rushing to lock doors, to draw lines, to fight for what was mine. But instead, I hesitated. I told myself Tom was being overly suspicious, that his years on the force had made him cynical. I told myself Vera deserved happiness after the storm of Paul's drinking and abuse. I told myself that interfering would only push her further away, the way I'd already scared off 2 boyfriends in the past with my protective instincts. So I did nothing. I watched. I waited. I hoped. Hoped that my daughter's judgment would clear with time. Hoped that maybe Titus would prove me wrong. Hoped that love, the blind, desperate kind, would somehow shield us from danger. 3 months of hoping while Titus slowly moved his way into our home, learned our routines, gained access to our accounts, studied us like a wolf circling a penned herd. 3 months of smiling at Vera while my guts screamed that we were being hunted. The sharp beep of the coffee maker yanked me back to the present. The scent of bitter brew filled the kitchen as I poured a cup and sat in my usual chair. My eyes drifted to the seat across from me, the same seat where Titus had leaned back so casually, flashing that smile as he planned the destruction of everything I had built. The truth clawed at me then. I had all the information I needed: a police officer's warning, a documented criminal record, my own instincts screaming louder with every passing day. And yet I had done nothing. Nothing but hide behind fear. Fear of losing Vera's love. Fear of being painted as controlling like Paul. Fear that by standing up to protect my family, I'd somehow become the villain. Now here we were, broke, betrayed, hollowed out, because I had let fear sit in the driver's seat while Titus stripped us bare. Upstairs, Micah's video game noises cut off. The sound of footsteps crossed the floor. Bathroom break, then homework. In 15 minutes, my grandson would come downstairs expecting dinner laughter, normalcy. A boy who still believed in family and the safety of home. But there was no safety anymore. Not from his own mother. Time was running out. The conversation I'd been avoiding for weeks, maybe months, couldn't be postponed any longer. He deserved the truth no matter how much it shattered him. I rinsed my cup in the sink, watching the last drops of coffee swirl down the drain. Everything was disappearing just like that money family. The illusion that decency alone was enough to protect the ones you love. But one thing remained. Micah, my grandson, my responsibility. The last reason I had to stand tall. I walked slowly back toward the living room, each step heavier than the last, preparing myself for the hardest conversation of my life. The living room seemed changed the moment I stepped back into it, as if the air itself had thickened with the gravity of what I had to do. The lamps cast their familiar glow on the walls, but tonight the light felt harsh, unforgiving, exposing every shadow of guilt that clung to me. The clock on the wall read 5:45, 15 minutes until Micah would close his computer and come down for homework. 30 minutes until the ritual of dinner, a ritual that had once felt like an anchor of stability, but tonight felt like a fragile illusion about to collapse. Routine would still happen, yes, but it would never again be normal. I found myself pacing from the couch to the coffee table, words tumbling in my head but refusing to take shape in my mouth. How do you explain betrayal to a child who still believes his mother is the safest place in the world? How do you tell him the truth without stealing every ounce of hope from his heart? Son, your mother took our money and ran away. Too blunt, too brutal. Micah, we need to talk about some changes. Too vague, too cold. Your mother has made some choices that affect our family. Too distant, too empty. No phrasing felt right. Every draft of truth left splinters in my throat. Upstairs, the sounds of Micah's video game floated down bright electronic notes, the soundtrack of some superhero adventure. Heroes saving the day, justice delivered without fail. The irony was cruel. My grandson was playing at a world where good always triumphed, while in our own home the villains had already walked away with everything that mattered. I sank into the couch, then rose again, moved to the armchair, back to the couch, restless. The house felt too small to hold the enormity of this conversation, yet too vast to contain the silence that would follow it. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator reminded me how empty these walls would soon feel once innocence was stripped from them. Through the ceiling came the small, ordinary sounds of Micah's routine, his desk chair squeaking as he pushed back from the game footsteps toward the bathroom, the flush of the running water. Everyday sounds, comforting sounds. Yet each of them struck me like a countdown. His world was still whole, still unbroken. Mine was already shattered. My mind raced, cycling through approaches. Should I ease him in with soft questions about his mother? Should I start with reassurance, his safety, his home, my presence? Or should I tell it straight, clean, and sharp, like tearing off a bandage? No matter how I rehearsed it, every version felt like a hammer blow that would break something inside him forever. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, cruelly steady. Each second was a reminder that time does not wait for courage. 5:50, his gaming chair squeaked again upstairs, the familiar pause of a save file. In minutes, he would be shutting down, gathering his books, descending the stairs like he had every Tuesday for the last 3 years. A rhythm, a routine, one last ordinary moment before everything turned to dust. I moved to the base of the staircase, resting my hand on the smooth-worn banister. My grandfather had carved these steps in 1952, a different time when families endured storms together, when loyalty was a promise that meant something. My palm traced the grooves left by decades of hands, by generations, who had climbed these stairs with faith in the strength of family. And then his voice. "Grandpa, I'll be down in 5 minutes." So casual, so full of warmth, the sound of a boy who still believed the world was steady beneath his feet. A boy who didn't yet know how fragile that world truly was. And in that moment, I wanted nothing more than to protect that innocence. But the truth was waiting, and I could not hide it forever. A child should never have to doubt the rhythm of an ordinary evening. Micah had no reason to believe that this Tuesday would be any different from the dozens before it, an evening marked by homework, dinner, small conversations, laughter that filled the quiet corners of the house. "Take your time, son." I called up, my voice steadier than the storm twisting in my chest. From upstairs came the small, ordinary noises of his preparation, the quick rasp of a zipper, the slide of textbooks pulled free, the shuffle of loose papers being arranged into order. Each sound was a note in the familiar music of our lives together, a music that made me proud. Micah was a good student, methodical, precise, careful, in ways most 15-year-olds weren't. He had inherited his mother's sharp intelligence, yes, but without the recklessness that had so often undermined her. At least I prayed he hadn't inherited that part. As I stood at the foot of the stairs, hand resting on the old wooden banister, it struck me how much I had taken for granted. The gentle satisfaction of watching him spread his books across the table while dinner simmered in the kitchen. The small joy of helping him through an algebra problem, only to hear him turn around and explain it back to me in his own words. The easy rhythm of asking about his day, his friends, his teachers, believing there would always be another evening, another tomorrow, another safe routine. But that illusion was gone. Everything was about to break. The wall clock clicked over to 5:55. Its hands marched forward with ruthless indifference, like a river carrying us closer and closer to the edge of a waterfall. No matter how I tried to resist, time would not stop. The truth was waiting. I slid my phone from my pocket again, though I already knew what I'd see. No missed calls, no messages, no last-minute apology, no change of heart. Vera was gone, truly gone. Gone in a way that left no door open behind her, no space for Micah in the new life she'd chosen, and it was my responsibility to tell him. I cleared my throat, forcing steadiness into my voice. "Micah, can you come down here for a minute? We need to talk." There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear the soft rustle of his papers. Then his voice calm, trusting, unguarded. "Sure, Grandpa. Just let me finish saving my homework file." Even that small detail struck me. Careful, precise, never careless with important things. So unlike his mother, who had thrown away everything, with one reckless choice. The familiar sequence followed the click of keys, the soft chime of a computer shutting down properly, the scrape of a chair sliding back, the creak of footsteps across his room. And then footsteps on the floorboards above me, the final steps before his world would tilt forever. In half a minute, maybe less, he would appear at the top of the stairs with his usual easy smile ready to ask what was for dinner, and I would have to tell him that the woman who was supposed to love him most in this world had abandoned him. That his mother had chosen money and a criminal's promises over her own son's welfare. That she had left him behind like a burden too heavy to carry. The weight of that truth pressed against my chest so hard I thought my ribs might crack. I saw the first glimpse of his sneaker as it touched the step, then the second. My heart slammed against my ribs in a rhythm that felt like panic and grief colliding. With each step he descended, I knew I was walking closer to the end of his innocence, to the moment where childhood would be cut short by betrayal. And then he was there. Micah appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his gait unhurried, his stride easy as though he were stepping into any other evening. But when my eyes lifted to meet his, the words I had rehearsed scattered like dry leaves in the wind, because his expression wasn't curious, it wasn't confused, it wasn't even unaware. His eyes, those clear, steady eyes, already carried too much knowledge for a boy his age. Without hesitation, he crossed the room and sat down beside me on the couch. Not too close, not crowding, but near enough to offer comfort. The small, instinctive gesture of someone preparing for a difficult conversation, not stumbling into one blindly. I reached for his hand, my throat aching with the words I had practiced. "Son, I need to tell you something important about your mother." But before I could continue, he spoke. "Grandpa," he said softly, evenly, "I already know." No shock, no tears. Just a quiet, heavy resignation. And beneath it, a strange strength, a glimmer of determination that looked almost protective. "She took all the money," Micah continued, "and left with Titus." Right. The words struck me like a plunge into icy water. My mouth opened, but no sound came. Finally, I managed to whisper, when did you find out?" His voice didn't tremble. "I heard them planning it. Monday night." Micah shifted on the couch, turning to face me fully. His young face, usually softened by laughter or curiosity, carried an expression far older than his years. His eyes held no trace of childish fear, only a calm, deliberate seriousness that shook me to my core. "I was just getting a glass of water around midnight." He began, his voice steady though soft, when I heard voices coming from Mom's room. The door wasn't shut all the way. I leaned closer and I heard them. They were talking about bank accounts, about taking everything and getting away clean. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. My mind reeled, stumbling backward through time, 24 hours, maybe more. Monday night. While I had been lying in bed, lulled by the false comfort of silence under my roof, my daughter, my own flesh and blood, had been plotting betrayal just down the hallway. "You've known since Monday." My voice cracked, betraying the storm inside me. Micah nodded slowly, his expression unflinching. The timeline spun through my head in chaos. Monday night, she whispered plans of escape. Tuesday morning, Micah got dressed for school as if nothing had changed. He had done his homework at the kitchen table, eaten dinner with me, laughed politely at my worn-out stories, all the while carrying this unbearable truth. "You went to school yesterday morning like it was just another day," I murmured, my heart aching with both admiration and sorrow. "You did homework, ate dinner with me. You didn't say a word." "I couldn't tell you then," Micah said, his voice gaining quiet strength, the tone of someone who had thought this through far more than any 15-year-old should. "I needed time. Time to figure out how to fix it first. And—" He paused, glancing down at his hands before meeting my eyes again. "I wanted you to have one more normal day before everything changed." The weight of his words pressed against my chest until it hurt. My grandson, just a boy, had carried this burden alone for more than 36 hours. He had chosen to shield me from heartbreak, even while I had been so consumed with the thought of protecting him. The roles had reversed in silence, and I hadn't even seen it. Suddenly, he stood up, his movements, brisk and purposeful. He crossed the room to his backpack by the door and pulled something out. When he turned back, he was holding a manila folder, thick with papers. "But don't worry, Grandpa," he said as he laid it carefully on the coffee table. His hands moved with the composure of someone who had prepared for this moment. I already handled it. Handled? What exactly, I asked, though a sliver of dread and awe twisted inside me. He opened the folder and spread several sheets of paper across the table, with methodical care, like an attorney presenting evidence to a jury. The first page stopped me cold, a grainy black and white photograph, clearly printed from a school computer. A mugshot, a face I recognized instantly. Titus. The word wanted blazed across the top in bold black letters. Micah tapped the date beneath the photo. Titus robbed Murphy's corner store last Tuesday, April 1st. His finger pressed firmly against the page. I found this on the Columbus Police Department's website. He's wanted for armed robbery and there's a reward. For a moment the world tilted. My eyes burned as I stared at that face, the same man who had sat casually at my kitchen table sipping coffee, while asking questions about my pension, about my security system, about our lives. The same man my daughter had chosen over her own son, over me. Where did you get this? I managed to ask, though. My throat felt dry. I printed it during lunch at school yesterday. Micah explained, his voice calm, practical. Mrs. Henderson lets us use the computer lab for research projects. Before I could process that, he flipped to the next page. Handwritten notes filled the sheet, neat, organized, methodical. His careful teenager's script mapped out dates of prior arrests, details from news clippings, connections between criminal cases. After I heard their plan Monday night, I couldn't sleep, he said. So I researched everything I could about Titus Morrison. My hands shook as I turned the pages. What I saw was staggering. My grandson, just 15 years old, had assembled a detailed background investigation, thorougher in some ways than anything I had ever attempted. Micah leaned forward, his finger landing on a line scrawled at the bottom of the notes. And I know exactly where they went. There in his handwriting was an address. 2847 Lane Avenue, Columbus. Near OSU, he recited from memory. I heard Mom mention it when they thought I was asleep. I stared at him, bewildered. How do you remember the address so precisely? I wrote it down as soon as I heard it, Micah replied simply. Then I looked it up on Google Street View to make sure it was real. From the folder, he pulled another sheet, a printed map, the address circled in bold red ink. It's a crappy apartment complex about 2 miles from the university, he said matter-of-factly. I turned the pages slowly, each one a revelation I wasn't prepared for. Maps, criminal records, a timeline analysis, even photographs of the apartment building he had found online. The level of detail was staggering. My 15-year-old grandson had approached this crisis with the systematic thoroughness of a detective. And yet, while he had done all this, he had still sat at our dinner table, still asked me about my day, still smiled like everything was fine. Micah had lived a double life for 36 hours, dutiful student, responsible grandson on the surface, silent investigator in the shadows, and I had never seen it coming. Son, this is incredible work, but why didn't you tell me any of this yesterday? We could have stopped them before they took the money. Micah's expression shifted, calm, but weighted, the kind of look you don't expect to see on a 15-year-old. His eyes, steady and unblinking, held the sharpness of someone who had been forced to grow up too fast. Because I knew you'd try to talk Mom out of leaving, he said quietly, but with the certainty of someone who had rehearsed the truth in his head. You always try to fix things with her, even when she doesn't want them fixed. And if she had stayed Grandpa, she would have just found another way to take advantage of you later. The words struck deep like a blade sliding between ribs. I wanted to deny it, to argue, but I couldn't. He was right. That was who I'd always been with Vera, the fixer, the negotiator, the fool who believed love could cover every betrayal. If I'd known about their plans sooner, I would have confronted her, tried to reason, probably even offered her money just to keep her close, to keep the illusion of family intact. Micah had seen through all of that. But I did something better than stopping them, he continued, and in that moment his voice carried a note of pride, so steady, so unwavering, it made him sound older than his years. I leaned forward. Better, I called the police tip hotline this morning before school, told them exactly where to find a wanted fugitive, gave them the address, described their car, everything. He slid a sheet of paper across the coffee table. His handwriting was neat and deliberate, a confirmation number along with the exact time of the call. 9:45 a.m., Tuesday, April 8th. Anonymous tip regarding Titus Morrison wanted for armed robbery. I sank back into the couch, staring at the paper as if it might dissolve in my hands. My grandson, my boy, had done what I hadn't even had the courage to think of. While I had been drowning in confusion, stumbling through my day like a blind man grasping at walls, he had been calm, calculating, precise. He had moved us both towards safety without hesitation. Micah, my voice cracked. You're braver and smarter than anyone your age should ever have to be. He didn't smile. He didn't boast. He just met my gaze and said softly, I learned from watching you, Grandpa. You taught me that when someone threatens your family, you protect them. That's all I was doing. But the truth hit me like a stone in the chest. He had protected me better than I had ever protected him. For years, I had enabled his mother's selfish choices, forgiven her, excused her, shielded her. I thought I was protecting him by keeping the peace. But in reality, he had been watching, learning. And when the time came, he had been the one strong enough to act. I swallowed hard. Why didn't you tell me earlier today, though, when I came home from the bank, so upset you saw me falling apart? His expression softened, then the steel in his eyes giving way to something gentler. Because I could see you were already hurting enough. And I wasn't sure the police would act quickly. I didn't want to give you hope if nothing came of it. My throat tightened. My grandson had carried this alone, not only solving the problem, but protecting me from disappointment, from despair. He had stepped into a role I was supposed to fill. The role reversal was complete. Micah had become the protector, and I had become the one who needed protecting. The sudden shrill of my phone cut through the quiet, startling both of us. Its sharp ring echoed in the living room like an alarm. I glanced at the screen, then back at Micah. His face was calm, expectant, as if he already knew what news might be waiting on the other end. We should probably answer that, I said, reaching for it. Not yet. Micah placed a steady hand on my arm. His touch was firm but gentle. Let me explain the rest first. The phone continued to ring relentless, but I set it aside, letting it buzz into silence. My grandson had earned the right to finish without interruption. You asked why I didn't tell you earlier, he said, carefully stacking his papers into a neat pile, every motion deliberate, as if organizing his thoughts along with the evidence. The truth is, I've been watching Mom take advantage of you for years. Years, Grandpa. And I was tired of seeing you get hurt. His voice cracked slightly, then reminding me he was still just a boy under all that steel. He leaned back against the couch, suddenly small in its cushions, despite everything he'd just accomplished. Remember last Christmas? His eyes lifted to mine. She promised she'd help with groceries, but instead she spent her whole paycheck on that purse. And you just smiled and said it was fine. That we'd make do. The memory twisted my gut. I remembered it all too well, Vera's bright smile as she showed off the designer bag, the way she justified the expense by saying she needed something professional for job interviews. Interviews that never came. Jobs she never even tried for. I had smiled through it, just as Micah said, convincing myself that keeping the peace was worth the sacrifice. But my grandson hadn't forgotten. He had carried that memory and countless others like quiet scars. And now those scars had forged him into someone stronger, someone who refused to be fooled again. Or when she borrowed $300 for your school clothes, I said slowly, the memory cutting like glass. But then I saw her wearing those new boots that cost twice as much. Micah didn't flinch. His voice carried that patient, steady tone of someone who had been quietly watching, cataloging every disappointment, every broken promise, every misplaced priority for years. You never asked for the money back, he said softly. You never made her explain where it went. You just let it go every single time. The truth in his words was undeniable. The pattern was there, plain as day, and hearing it through his voice, through the eyes of the boy who had lived it with me, made it cut even deeper. Every time Vera had held out her hand, I had filled it without hesitation. No questions, no conditions, no expectations. I had been enabling her for years, cushioning her from responsibility while leaving myself open to be hurt again and again. I love Mom, Grandpa. His voice trembled for the briefest second, then steadied clear and deliberate. But I love you more. Those words struck me harder than any of his carefully documented evidence or logical reasoning. They pierced straight through my heart, sharp and undeniable. You're the one who makes sure I eat breakfast every day, Micah continued, his eyes glistening. You're the one who sits with me at the kitchen table, helping me with math homework when I'm ready to give up. You're the one who comes to my chess tournaments even when no one else does, and you're the one who remembers when I have tests coming up. He was right. God, he was so right. While Vera lived under my roof, drifting through the days, as though responsibility were optional, I had been the one providing stability. I had been the one filling both roles, grandfather and parent, while she hovered more like another dependent than a partner in raising her own son. When I heard them planning to take your money, Micah said, his voice tightening with determination, I realized this was finally my chance to protect you for once, instead of always being the one who needs protecting. I looked at him, then not as a boy, but as someone stepping into a strength far beyond his years. His voice grew steadier, richer with conviction. You've spent 15 years taking care of me. It was time for me to take care of you. The disorientation of that role reversal left me breathless. My grandson, 15 years old, had seen the truth more clearly than I ever had. While I had been paralyzed by shock, stuck in the endless loop of trying to rescue his mother from her own choices, he had researched, planned, acted. He had done what I could not. I couldn't let them hurt you anymore. He whispered the words, breaking into the space between us like a vow. You're all I have that really matters. I reached across the space between us and pulled him into me. My arms tightened around him, fiercely protective but also desperate, because in that moment I realized he had become my protector too. His arms wrapped around me with surprising strength, grounding me. And for just a few heartbeats, there were no police reports, no stolen money, no betrayals to process. There were only two people, grandfather and grandson, clinging to each other in the wreckage of a broken family, promising silently to be enough for each other. We're going to be fine, you know, I murmured into his hair, my voice rough but certain. Just you and me. We make a pretty good team, better than we ever were with Mom around. His voice was muffled against my shoulder, but I could hear the relief in it, like a dam finally breaking. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. You were always afraid she'd do something like this, weren't you? I was, he admitted quietly. Always. And now, at least we know where we stand. When we finally pulled apart, both of us had tears in our eyes. But they weren't the hopeless kind. They weren't grief. They were something closer to release, to relief, to the fragile beginnings of healing. The crisis had ripped away the illusions we'd been clinging to, but in their place it revealed something stronger. Us. So what happens next? Micah asked, wiping his face quickly, his voice shifting back to the practical tone of a boy who'd been forced to grow up too fast. If the police arrest them, do we get the money back? I don't know the legal process, I admitted honestly. Maybe. Maybe not. But even if we don't see a penny, we'll figure it out. I've got my pension. And you? I touched his shoulder. You've got a good head on your shoulders. Between the two of us, we'll handle whatever comes. Micah nodded, but the worry didn't leave his eyes. Are we going to have enough money, though, for groceries and bills and everything? It was such a raw, practical question one no 15-year-old should ever have to ask. And yet the sincerity in his tone showed me just how deeply he understood the reality of our new lives. He wasn't a child living in ignorance anymore. He was standing on the threshold of adulthood, carrying weight no boy his age should bear. I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped. Because in that silence, a memory rose up sharp and unbidden, a reminder of the promises I had once made to him, to myself, to this family, and how everything had changed. Something stirred in my memory, something I had buried under the avalanche of betrayal and heartbreak from the past few hours. A detail, small but vital, that could ease at least part of the heavy burden weighing on Micah's young shoulders. You know what, Micah? My voice broke the silence as I pushed myself up from the couch. A spark of energy, faint but real, coursed through my weary body. I just remembered something upstairs. His eyes, still swollen from emotion, but alive with curiosity, followed me instantly. What kind of something, Grandpa? For the first time since I'd stared in horror at the empty balance of my bank account, I felt the muscles in my face pull into a genuine smile. A quiet, secretive smile. The kind of something your mother never knew existed, I said softly. Micah leaned forward, ready to spring up. Wait here a minute, I started, but then paused, glancing back at him. Actually, no. You should see this. The stairs, which only an hour ago had felt like a mountain under the weight of grief, now seemed lighter beneath my steps. Each rise felt like a step towards something new, not just survival, but possibility. Micah followed close behind, bounding 2 steps at a time, his excitement barely contained. My bedroom sat quietly at the far corner of the second floor, untouched by the day's chaos. Modest, practical, much like myself. The oak frame bed, weathered with years of use. The dresser crowded with framed photographs, mostly of family moments, now tainted by loss, but still precious. The nightstand with its humble clutter, my reading glasses and old lamp, and the small alarm clock that had woken me faithfully at 6 a.m. for decades. What are we looking for? Micah asked, his voice hushed with reverence, as if sensing the gravity of what was about to be revealed. A policy, I replied, kneeling down beside the bed. My hand groped under the frame until it brushed against cool metal. Not the kind you buy from a company, the kind you create for yourself. With a grunt, I pulled out the fireproof box I had hidden there 2 years ago. Its plain gray metal gave no hint of the weight of security it carried inside. Heavier than it looked, it thudded against the faded blue comforter as I lifted it onto the bed. Micah's eyes widened. What's in it? Instead of answering, I reached to the nightstand, gently moving aside the photograph of his grandmother, my late wife, whose calm smile still radiated from the frame. Behind it, taped discreetly to the wood, was a small brass key. I held it up for Micah to see. Your mother walked past this room every single day for 3 years, I explained as I slid the key into the lock. And not once did she ever ask what was in here or why I kept it locked. The latch clicked open. Slowly, almost ceremoniously, I lifted the lid. Inside, neat stacks of bills lay waiting, 20s, 50s, even a few hundreds bundled with rubber bands organized by denomination, the product of quiet, disciplined saving. My heart thudded in my chest as relief washed over me. Micah's breath caught. Grandpa, how much is in there? Let's find out together. I pulled out the first stack, laying the crisp bills in neat rows on the bed. My hands moved with a ritualistic precision, counting aloud 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. The familiar rhythm of numbers, once a mere calculation, now sounded like a hymn of hope. Stack by stack, we spread the money across the faded comforter. The bed that had once been only a place of rest now became the stage for something greater, proof of resilience, foresight, and a safety net neither of us had dared hope for. For Micah, it was a revelation. For me, it was a reminder that even in my quietest, most uncertain years, I had prepared for storms like this. And tonight, when everything else had been ripped away, that preparation meant we still had a fighting chance. Some bills were crisp, their edges sharp as if they had only just left the bank. Others were soft, worn thin from years of circulation, carrying invisible fingerprints of strangers long gone. Yet here they were gathered together, united by purpose, every single one, a quiet testament to the small monthly deposits I had hidden away from Vera's knowledge. 1,220s, I announced, the numbers sounding heavier than mere arithmetic. My voice grew steadier with each word as I moved on to the next stack. 850 in 50s, and 1,200 in hundreds. I counted the final stack, once then again, twice, just to be certain. When the last bill slipped from my fingers, the total sat before us, $3,200. Micah's eyes widened. He stared at the spread of green paper across the comforter, as if it were treasure unearthed from some forgotten vault. For a boy who had just watched his world collapse, this sudden flood of hope seemed almost unreal. You've been hiding this the whole time. His voice trembled between suspicion and awe. Not hiding, I corrected, gently gathering the bills into neater rows. Protecting. My hands worked automatically, but my mind was already far away, tracing back to an earlier generation. My grandfather lived through the Great Depression, I said, hearing his voice echo in memory. He taught me one lesson I never forgot. Never keep all your eggs in one basket. Always set something aside, something no one else knows about. Something only you can depend on. Back then, his warnings had felt like relics of a bygone age, outdated advice in a world of modern banking, credit cards, and direct deposits. I used to think it was unnecessary, even paranoid. But here tonight, surrounded by betrayal, his words had risen from the grave to prove themselves more valuable than any financial institution. Vera had cleaned out every account she could reach. Every balance she knew of had been reduced to zero, leaving behind nothing but emptiness and despair. But she had never touched this. She had never even guessed. Why didn't Mom know about it? Micah asked quietly. I paused, the truth pressing heavily against my chest. Because somewhere deep down, I knew this day might come. The words stung as they left me. Painful but necessary. I love your mother. I truly do. But I've watched her make selfish choices for years. Some part of me understood, even if I didn't want to admit it, that my resources needed limits. That I couldn't leave everything open to her whims. Micah said nothing, but I felt his silence. Not judgmental, simply reflective. Together we returned the bills to their original stacks, his young fingers moving with a careful, almost reverent touch, as though he recognized the weight of what this money meant. So, we're actually okay. His voice lifted slightly, testing hope for the first time all day. I looked at him. This boy forced to shoulder too much too soon. Yes, for several months at least, I reassured him. Long enough to figure out our next steps, to make decisions about the future, maybe even recover some of what was stolen if the police do their job. The box clicked shut beneath my hands. The key slid back into its hiding place behind his grandmother's frame, just as it had been before. But nothing was the same anymore. The look on Micah's face made every hidden dollar worth it. Relief softened his sharp, burdened expression, peeling away the weight that had aged him years in a single day. For the first time since this morning, I saw him not as a boy forced into adulthood, but as a 15-year-old again, vulnerable, hopeful, alive. Can we go back downstairs now? Micah asked after a moment, his voice lighter, almost shy. I want to finish setting up the chess game we never got to play. Chess, our ritual, our quiet sanctuary for 3 years. A board 32 pieces and a bond built move by move, a symbol of stability in a world that had just been shattered. The thought made me smile. Absolutely, I said, lifting the storage box with a newfound steadiness. Let me put this back where it belongs. Then we'll see if you've improved your endgame strategy since last week. Together we descended the stairs, me with the box in hand, him with the eager bounce of anticipation. Each step felt like leaving the ruins of crisis behind and walking toward recovery. The house hadn't changed. The same furniture filled the rooms, the same photographs lined the walls, the same echoes of family life lingered in the corners. But it felt different now. It no longer pretended to be a home for 3. It was honestly a home for 2. And somehow that truth felt stronger, more genuine than the false stability we had clung to before. In the living room, Micah was already at the cabinet, pulling out the old wooden chess set. His hands moved with practiced ease, arranging pawns, knights, and bishops onto the board. It was a sight I had seen countless times, but tonight it glowed with new meaning. This was not just a game. It was a declaration: we are still here, and we are still together. The familiar ritual of arranging pawns, lining up rooks and bishops, and setting the queen in her place brought a calm rhythm back into the room. For a brief, precious moment, it felt like the day's storms had passed. I placed the storage box carefully on the mantelpiece beside the framed photographs. Silent guardians of years gone by, reminders that security and foresight could exist side by side with love and sacrifice. Then I sank into my usual chair across from Micah, letting the comfort of routine wash over me. Your move, Grandpa, he said softly, his fingers hovering over the white pieces. But before I could touch a pawn, the phone rang. Its sharp metallic tone shattered the fragile bubble of peace we'd managed to create. The chessboard between us suddenly seemed abandoned, the orderly ranks of pieces frozen mid-battle, forgotten. It was 8:30 in the evening, too late for friendly calls in our quiet neighborhood, too deliberate to be a mistake. The old black rotary phone with its mechanical insistence seemed louder tonight, as though it were carrying not just sound but judgment. Micah looked up at me, his eyes wide, full of the same knowledge tightening in my chest. We both knew who it was. I rose slowly, as if moving through water, every step heavy with inevitability. The phone sat on the side table, buzzing with urgency. When I finally lifted the receiver, the weight of it pressed into my palm like an anchor. Hello, Dad? Vera's voice cracked through the line like a whip. Not a greeting, not even a pause, just raw accusation, hot and merciless. How could you betray me like this? Titus is arrested. The police took everything. Everything. How could you do this to me? Her words poured out like fire, so sharp that Micah heard everyone from across the room. He flinched, but I held up my hand, a silent signal to stay quiet, to stay still. He needed to hear this to understand what choices meant, what consequences followed. But he also needed my shield. "Where are you, Vera? Are you safe?" I asked, steadying my tone, though I already knew the answer. "Safe." Her laugh was jagged, brittle. "I'm broke and alone because of you. The police knew exactly where to find us. They had our address, knew about the money, everything. You called them, didn't you?" "Don't lie to me, Dad." The silence that followed in the living room was so heavy, I could hear Micah's breath catch. My choice hung in the air. I could tell the truth, protect him, take the burden myself. Or I could expose him, reveal that it was his courage, not mine, that brought justice crashing down on Titus. The decision lasted only a heartbeat. Yes. The words slipped out, clear, resolute, unshaken. It was mine to carry. Silence. A long, cutting pause that felt endless. Then her voice returned, lower, colder, more dangerous than her screams. "I can't believe you would turn your own daughter into the police." I closed my eyes briefly, drawing strength. "You stole my life savings, Vera. 42 years of labor, of sacrifice. Money that was meant for my retirement, for emergencies, for survival. And you threw it away on lies and crime. You weren't even using it." She snapped, her anger climbing again, desperate, defensive. "It was mine to use, Vera. My safety net, my future. Not yours to gamble with." My words cut, each one deliberate, like nails hammering down the final board on a coffin. I never thought I'd have to build the coffin of trust between father and daughter. On the other end of the line, Vera's breathing turned ragged. "You had no right," she hissed. "I'm your daughter." Her words, meant to wound, only deepened the ache already inside me. She was my daughter. And yet in that moment, she felt further from me than a stranger on the street. I deserved better than living in that tiny town, working dead-end jobs, never getting anywhere. Vera's voice cracked through the receiver, drenched in self-pity. It was a tone I had heard countless times before, one that always managed to ignite both sadness and anger deep inside me. Titus could have given me a real life. We could have started over somewhere new. Her words tasted of delusion. Somewhere new, with stolen money. With a man who had a rap sheet longer than his promises. With stolen money and a criminal wanted for armed robbery. I asked quietly, the disbelief heavy in my tone. He was trying to change. Vera snapped back, clinging desperately to the fantasy she had built. "People can change, Dad." I let my eyes drift across the room to Micah. My grandson stood near the chessboard, his gaze fixed on me, his young face carved with seriousness far beyond his years. He was listening to every word, absorbing every painful truth, every hard lesson about loyalty, responsibility, and the weight of choices. He had risked everything to protect me from the chaos his mother had unleashed, and now here she was, demanding sympathy for the storm she had chosen to walk into. "The money is gone," I said firmly, my voice carrying the finality of a verdict. "The police confiscated it as evidence. Titus is in jail, and you are exactly where your choices have led you." "This is all your fault," she screamed, her voice rising to a shriek so piercing I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "I'm homeless and penniless because you couldn't just let me be happy." The words struck like knives, but I steadied myself. My chest tightened, my heart heavy, but I refused to let her rewrite the truth. "I couldn't let you destroy our family." I said, each word weighted with months of suppressed pain. "You abandoned your son, stole from your father, and ran away with a criminal. Those were your choices, Vera, not mine." Through the line, I heard the faint sounds of traffic horns, engines, the distant shuffle of city life. She was outside, probably at a payphone, or borrowing someone else's cell, exposed and adrift in the world she had chosen. And still she blamed everyone but herself. "You've ruined everything," she shrieked, her fury escalating, raw and unrestrained. "This was my chance at real happiness, and you destroyed it." I lowered the receiver slightly, letting the venom of her words pass me by. Micah had moved closer now, standing just behind my chair, his quiet presence a steady hand at my back. In that moment, his silent loyalty gave me more strength than I had thought possible. "I protected my family," I said finally, my voice quiet but resolute. "From you." The silence on the line was sudden and heavy, broken only by the ragged sound of her breathing. Then after several unbearable seconds, her voice returned colder, now stripped of rage laced with something far more dangerous. "This isn't over." My hand tightened on the receiver. "What do you mean this isn't over?" I asked cautiously, though part of me dreaded her reply. "I mean," she said slowly, almost calmly, "you haven't heard the last from me. I'm stranded because of what you did. I need money to get back on my feet. The money you stole is gone, confiscated by police. But you still have other money. Your pension, your savings, the accounts I couldn't get to. Send me something, anything. I'm your daughter." Her plea wasn't new. It was the same manipulative melody she had sung for years, the voice that had talked me into covering her rent, paying her lawyer fees, bailing her out of one disaster after another. The voice that trained me to say yes, to sacrifice my own security for her comfort, to enable her recklessness, while convincing myself it was love. But not tonight. Not after this. "No." The single syllable was quiet, but it fell into the silence like an iron weight, final and unmovable. "What do you mean, no?" she asked, her disbelief dripping through the receiver. Her tone shifted from demanding to panicked. "I'm homeless. I have nowhere to go. No way to buy food or find shelter." I took a breath, steadying my voice, surprised at how unwavering it sounded. "Then you should have thought about that before you stole from your family and ran away with a criminal. Those are the consequences of your choices, Vera." "You can't just abandon me," she cried. "I'm your child. And Micah, he's your grandson. He's my son." Her voice cracked at his name, but Micah stood firm, his eyes never leaving mine. And in that moment, I knew my responsibility was no longer to the woman on the other end of the line, but to the boy beside me, the boy who needed protection, stability, and love more than Vera needed another handout. I looked at my grandson, whose eyes were fixed on me, with a mixture of pride and amazement, as though he were watching a truth unfold that he had long suspected but never dared hope to hear aloud. He was the child Vera had abandoned without hesitation, the boy she was willing to drag into a life of crime and uncertainty simply because she craved a fresh start with a man whose fists had left strangers unconscious on barroom floors. There was silence on the line, then came her voice, sharp and dismissive. "That's different. Micah is 15. He can take care of himself." My chest tightened. "He's not an adult, Vera. He's a child who needs stability, security, and people who love him enough to put his welfare above their own selfish desires." My words trembled with the weight of months, no years of suppressed frustration, heartbreak, and bitter disappointment. "And everything you've shown me proves you cannot provide those things." She spat back without hesitation, her voice full of wounded pride. "I could have provided plenty if you hadn't interfered. Titus had plans." I almost laughed, but the sound died in my throat. "Titus is a career criminal, Vera. A man who robbed a convenience store just a week before you stole my money. His plans were nothing but illusions, dreams built on a stolen cash and more crime. That's not a future. That's a trap." At that moment, I felt Micah's hand rest gently on my shoulder. That small gesture, steady, warm, full of trust, gave me the courage to keep speaking the truth I had carried too long. "I won't enable that kind of life. Not for you, not for him, not for anyone." Her reply came quick, sharp, with defiance. "Fine, then I'll figure it out myself. But don't expect me to come crawling back when you change your mind." I exhaled slowly, steadying my voice. "I hope you do figure it out, Vera. I truly do. I hope you find a way to build a legitimate life to make amends for what you've done, and maybe someday to earn back the trust you've shattered. But I won't send you money just to make bad choices easier." Her voice cracked, half accusation, half plea. "So that's it. You're choosing money over your own daughter." My throat tightened, but my words came out firm. "No, Vera. I'm choosing Micah's welfare over your immediate wants. I'm choosing responsibility over enablement. I'm choosing to break the pattern that has hurt all of us, including you, for far too long." There was a pause, then the sound of ragged breathing. She was crying now, though the tears carried more anger than remorse. "If that's how you want it, then fine. Don't expect to ever see me again. Don't expect phone calls or letters or visits. Don't expect to meet any grandchildren I might have in the future. You've made your choice, and I'm making mine. Her ultimatum struck like a blade meant to wound, designed to make me second-guess my resolve to frighten me into bending once again. But as I sat there in my living room, Micah standing close beside me, surrounded by the quiet strength of the home we had built, our photos on the mantel. The chessboard still waiting between us, the threat felt less like punishment and more like release. "If that's what you decide, Vera," I said softly, "then I'll be sad, but I'll understand. The door will always be open if you want to return under different circumstances, if you're ready to be accountable, to make amends, to contribute, instead of just taking." Her voice turned icy, almost mocking. "You mean if I'm ready to crawl back on my hands and knees, begging forgiveness for daring to want a better life?" I swallowed hard, my voice calm but firm. "I mean, if you're ready to acknowledge that stealing from your family and abandoning your son were wrong, that they hurt the very people who loved you most. If you're ready to earn trust, not demand it." A bitter laugh came down the line. "Well, I'm not ready for that, and I never will be." Her words were final, cold as stone. I closed my eyes, and in that silence I saw her as she had once been, the little girl whose hand I had steadied as she wobbled on her first bicycle, the young woman I had walked proudly down the aisle, the broken soul I had once pulled free from an abusive marriage. That daughter, my daughter, was about to cut herself from our lives forever, not because she was lost, but because she refused to accept responsibility for her choices. My voice caught, but I forced the words out, steady and unwavering. "I love you, Vera. I always will. But I won't enable your destructive choices anymore." Her reply came back sharp, dismissive, and devastating in its cruelty. "Save it for someone who cares." And then there was only silence. The line went dead with the brutal clang of a receiver being slammed down, a sound that echoed far louder in my heart than in my ears. I stood there clutching the silent phone, staring at nothing, as if the world itself had stopped. 38 years of being Vera's father, of nurturing her, protecting her, forgiving her, hoping for her, had ended with a hollow dial tone. It was the sound of a door slamming shut forever, and it cut deeper than any knife. Before I could even draw my next breath, I felt arms circle around me from behind Micah's arms. My grandson, just 15, yet carrying the weight and empathy of someone far older, held me as though he understood exactly what I had lost. He said nothing. He didn't have to. His presence was the salve I didn't know I needed in that moment, the quiet promise that family, though broken, still remained. I set the phone back in its cradle with hands that trembled, not from weakness, but from the gravity of finality. Then I turned, pulling Micah fully into an embrace, his cheek pressed against my chest, his heartbeat steady, his breath warm. For a long time we stood there in the stillness of the living room, surrounded by the familiar chess pieces, still set mid-game on the coffee table, photographs lining the mantel, and the quiet hum of a home that had been shaken to its core and somehow endured. Together we silently acknowledged what words could never capture, that our family had changed shape forever, and that this, just the two of us, was now permanent. The weeks that followed slid by like pages in a book of ordinary days, one after another, soft and steady. 2 months passed. Spring's blossoms gave way to early summer's warmth, and the crisis of April drifted into the background, like a bad dream that finally lost its grip. Life, once consumed by chaos, began to bloom in the small, tender ways of routine. Micah finished his sophomore year stronger than ever, bringing home grades that would make any parent glow with pride. It was his best semester since middle school, proof of what he could do when freed from the weight of his mother's endless demands and turmoil. I rediscovered joys I had nearly forgotten, cooking him breakfast every morning, walking past the schoolyard to cheer at his games, sitting beside him at the kitchen table in the evenings, while he worked through homework and I pretended to fuss with the crossword. We built a rhythm that was ours alone. Tuesdays became grocery day, Thursdays chess night. Weekends were reserved for projects: fixing the leaky faucet, planting flowers in the garden, patching the old shed. Micah approached each task with the eagerness of someone finally secure, someone who knew he belonged. His laughter began to fill the house in a way Vera's presence never had. The $3,000 I'd tucked away stretched far enough for our modest life, supplemented by my pension. Micah, determined to pull his own weight, took a summer job mowing lawns around the neighborhood. I watched him grow taller in those 2 months, his voice a little deeper, his shoulders a little straighter. He carried himself differently now, not like a boy clinging to the edge of chaos, but like a young man who finally knew where he stood in the world and what his efforts were worth. We rarely spoke of Vera. Her absence slipped into our lives like a shadow fading at dawn. At first I thought the silence might ache, that I would find myself reaching for her name, her presence. But the truth was simpler and sadder. Our lives felt lighter without her. The house seemed larger, airier, no longer suffocated by the tension of her next crisis, her next desperate demand. Peace replaced the undercurrent of fear. It was on a Thursday afternoon, June 6th, that I noticed just how far we'd come. I sat in my usual chair with the Riverside Herald open across my lap, the pages rustling softly in the warm breeze, drifting through the open windows. Outside, the maple tree swayed alive with the chatter of birds. From the kitchen table, I could hear the scratch of Micah's pen as he worked through his summer reading assignment. The house was quiet, steady, full of simple sounds that carried no threat. For the first time in years, I realized this was what home was meant to feel like. Our domestic tranquility had grown so familiar, so effortless, that I sometimes forgot how fragile it truly was, like a delicate glass vase balanced on the edge of a shelf. 2 months of peace had lulled me into believing this was our new normal, that the storms had finally passed. And then without warning, the sharp, heavy pounding on the front door shattered it, all the sounds splintering through the stillness, like a rock hurled through glass. Micah and I both startled, our eyes meeting across the room. We rarely had visitors we weren't expecting, and the neighbors kind, as they were always called first. The sound came again, louder, more urgent, the kind of knock that demanded attention, that dared us to ignore it. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Not the hour for dinner guests, nor the time for deliveries. My voice, rougher than I intended, broke the silence. Who could that be? It was more a thought spoken aloud than a question directed at Micah. Maybe it's the mailman, he offered, though both of us knew the mail had already been dropped off hours ago. His words were thin, a guess meant to settle the unease neither of us wanted to name. I rose from my chair, the newspaper slipping forgotten onto the floor, and moved toward the front window. Carefully, I pulled the curtain just enough to see, and then I froze, my breath catching in my chest. My fingers clutched the fabric as if the curtain itself were the only thing holding me upright. Vera. My daughter stood on the porch, thinner than the last time I'd seen her, as if the weight of her choices had begun to carve into her very frame. Her clothes were worn, hanging on her body, like they too were exhausted. At her feet sat a single duffel bag, small, battered, and heartbreakingly final. Everything she owned her whole life now seemed to be contained in that one sad bundle. She had come back. Grandpa Micah's voice was soft, uncertain, edged with the kind of caution no 15-year-old should ever need with their own mother. He stepped up beside me, his presence a quiet anchor against the tide of emotions flooding through me. What is it? I didn't answer right away. My mind spun tangled between memory and fear. 2 months of peace, 2 months of stability, 2 months of healing and building a life that actually worked. And now this. The knock came again, harder this time, followed by a voice I knew too well. The sound of it was a blade slicing open old wounds. Dad, I know you're in there. Please open the door. Micah stiffened. I saw his eyes widen as he recognized her voice. But instead of running toward it, he shifted instinctively closer to me, his body angled in silent loyalty and protection. In just 2 months, we had become a team, 2 souls rebuilding what was broken. His instincts told him what mine confirmed: we were safer standing together. Slowly, I made my way to the door, every step heavy with the weight of what waited on the other side. My hand came to rest on the deadbolt, the one I had installed just days after her last call, a small but defiant act of reclaiming my home, my boundaries. It wasn't just a lock. It was a line in the sand, a choice to open or to deny, to protect or to give in. My fingers hovered, trembling, not from weakness, but from the gravity of the decision. 2 months ago, I would have opened without hesitation, relief flooding me, hope sparking, that maybe this time she had changed. I would have offered comfort and money and endless chances. That man had lived in the shadow of fear, fear of losing her, fear of failing, her fear of admitting the truth. But that man was gone. The man standing at this door had learned something harder, something sharper, that love sometimes meant saying no. That protecting the ones who needed you most could mean turning your back on the ones who demanded the most. That family wasn't just biology, it was choice. It was loyalty, it was commitment. I drew a long breath, turned the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. There she was, Vera, my daughter. We stood facing one another, silence stretching thick and unbearable. Her eyes flickered, pleading, weary, defiant all at once. And for a moment the world held still, balanced on the edge of what would come next. She looked older, far older than 2 months should have made her. Her face was drawn, her skin pale, and there was a hollow tightness around her mouth that spoke of nights spent without rest, without safety. Whatever had filled her days and nights during the time she'd been gone had not been kind to her. Life had carved its signature into her frame, bending her shoulders, thinning her cheeks. Yet despite the marks of exhaustion, her eyes still carried that same unyielding glint. I knew too well, a mixture of defiance and entitlement, sharpened by years of choices that had cost her everything, including the people who had once loved her most. Those were the very eyes that had looked at me as she stole my life's savings, the same eyes that had turned away without remorse as she walked out and left her own son behind. "Hello, Dad." The words came flatly, almost carelessly, but to me they were weighted with every betrayal she had ever committed. My jaw tightened. Behind me, I didn't need to turn to know Micah had shifted closer. I felt his presence steady and unspoken, like a hand pressed firmly between my shoulder blades. He was ready to follow my lead, to stand with me, no matter what decision I made about the woman who had given him life, but failed so utterly to be his mother when he had needed one. "Hello, Vera," I said at last, my voice quieter than I expected, yet anchored with a firmness that hadn't been there before. Her gaze flicked past me, landing on the boy who stood silent in my shadow. There was a brief flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps guilt, perhaps only recognition, but it vanished too quickly to be trusted. "Hi, Micah," she said, her tone lighter, almost casual, as though 2 months hadn't passed since she had left him without a second thought, chasing dreams of easy money and the kind of reckless romance that had already destroyed too much of her life. Micah didn't answer. Not a word, not even a nod. But I could feel him beside me, like an anchor dropped deep into the seabed, holding me steady, reminding me of what we had built together in her absence. The laughter we had reclaimed, the trust we had carefully grown, the fragile sense of peace that had been born from our pain. He was silent, but his silence said everything. He wasn't going to beg for her, wasn't going to defend her, wasn't going to let me forget what it had cost us last time. Vera's eyes darted between us, expectant. She waited for something, for the old reflex, the automatic invitation, the foolish hope that forgiveness could be given cheaply, like it always had been before. But the door remained only half open, my body, a barrier she could not simply push through this time. The choice was mine, ours. And for the first time I hesitated, not out of fear of losing her, but out of fear of losing the hard-won peace we had managed to claim. Finally she spoke again, her voice lower, stripped of its usual bravado. "Can I come in?" The words hung heavy between us, a request that was more than a request. It was a test, a wound, reopened, a future waiting to be decided. And in that moment, with Micah standing close at my side, I realized I had never held more power over my own life than I did right then. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.